Our guest this morning is Engineer Stephen Ogenga. He is the Director General of the National Industrial Training Authority. Engineer Ogenga, good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to Kenya's biggest conversation.
Thank you.
That's the hot seat of the biggest conversation. Don't worry. It's cold out there, so it being hot in here is a good thing. Blessing, is it?
It is.
Yes. Now, today you're here because we're celebrating World Youth Skills Day 2022. You'll tell us about this day and why it's important. But let's begin with the institution that you represent, that you head. What's the National Industrial Training Authority for the people who don't know?
Yeah, thank you very much for hosting me this morning. It's a privilege to be hosted here at KTN and SpiceFM. My name, as you've heard, is Stephen Ogenga. I'm currently the Director General of the National Industrial Training Authority, NITA. NITA is a state corporation under the Ministry of Labor, established under CAP 237 of 2011. And our purpose and mandate for this economy is to be able to ensure that we produce workers for the economy who will be very productive and competitive. And therefore, that is our vision, and our mission is to ensure that we equip the citizens, including the youth, with the necessary skills and competencies that will allow them to be able to support this economy in all ways possible for both the local labor requirements and the external labor requirements. And we do this through several functions and programs, including carrying out industrial training, assessing and certifying the citizenry, and regulating training providers for this economy. And we are supported, of course, by an oversight of social partners that include the Federation of Kenya Employers, the Central Organization of Trade Unions, and more importantly, the government. So that is the role that we are playing for this economy in terms of ensuring that the skills economy or ecosystem is properly supported.
Okay, industrial training. When someone hears industrial training, they think, all right, but there are other institutions that are offering industrial training. There are, universities, there are TVETs, there are colleges, all these learning institutions are also offering some level of training and skill. What's the difference between what they offer and what you call industrial training?
Thank you very much. That is true. And in terms of industrial training is that we are focusing on the fact that we provide job-specific skills training. That means that we are the buffer that places the competence that are required and demanded by the world of work, which implies that in away from the formal training programs that is offered by the formal training system, we have a skills pathway that enables the entry behavior of the citizenry from nothing else in terms of formal education to taking them through a qualifications framework that allows them to transit to gain competences.
Could you give an example of how this thing works, please?
Yes, thank you very much. In terms of industrial training, we have several approaches to training, including offering apprenticeship programs, whereby we engage with employers to be able to enable their potential employees to come through a dual training program, where the dual training program means that the beneficiaries have an opportunity to train both at the workplace and institutions that we have accredited for the purposes of competence acquisition. That means that the potential employees and the beneficiaries have an opportunity to gain competences which are demand-driven by the employers in institutions that have been accredited, including TVET institutions and including institutions that NITA actually administrate. NITA itself has 5 centers, which it runs progressively. But more importantly, we have a database of over 500 accredited training providers who support the economy in as far as training is concerned.
Okay. Let's say I train as a plumber at a village polytechnic. All right? I've trained. I know this is called a wrench. This is called a hammer. I know this is called a spanner. I know this is called a screwdriver.
And this is a pipe.
And this is a pipe. And what is supposed to go through it. Now, that I've understood. I even have an idea. What does NITA do to make me more proficient in the workplace? I've already trained at the polytechnic. What exactly? Beyond, you said apprenticeship. Okay, for instance, so where will they take me? The Ministry of Water? Or these, what are these water organizations we have all over the county called?
Those are the ones, the water service providers.
Yeah, water service providers. What will NITA do?
Excellent. Several things. That one, we carry out what we call skills upgrading programs. These are programs that have been certified and qualified in terms of the qualifications framework. We also carry out pre-skilling, upskilling, and reskilling of workers. So what happens is that the vocational training centers, which are at the counties and which are under the policies of the TVET governance, are actually our key partners in as far as assessment and certification is concerned. So our role as NITA is to provide a training curricula or training programs that enhance the competences that are required to be gained in certain trade areas, including the plumbing that you've talked about, masonry, tailoring, and many other programs that are demanded by the economy.
Okay.
So our work is to ensure that we take the beneficiaries through qualifications, including grade 3 as the lowest, grade 2, grade 1, masterclass persons, which we have now introduced for the purposes of vertical mobility.
So you're the people in charge of these grade tests?
Exactly. Exactly.
So you administer the test at the village polytechnic?
Yes. In fact, from Monday, the coming Monday, 18th of July, we'll be administering the trade test in all the 47 countries in Kenya, and that is how impactful qualifications of NITA are concerned.
Okay.
All from grade 1 to grade 2 to grade 3, and now we have introduced the master class persons qualifications to enable the vertical mobility of our workers into the economy.
We have something that is happening in this country. It's talked about, and we are told it's going to actually take effect. On paper, there are supposed to be 27 economic zones in this country. Now, the economic zones will require certain expertise. If I were to take a leaf from the book of the EPZ, where organizations came in to sort of like, essentially it was garments that were being made predominantly. Now, just as an example, what role did NITA play in equipping people who had already learned how to tailor, meaning you knew this is a sewing machine? What did NITA do to upgrade, upscale these individuals so that they could actually work in an assembly line that produces quality garments for export?
Excellent. And that is exactly what we do. What we do is that we've actually configured the economy in terms of what we call sector training committees. And we have 9 sector training committees which are buffered by our social partners. That means that they are configured in committees that comprise representatives from Federation of Kenya Employers, KOTU, the informal sector, plus other partners that perform, that allow the citizenry to be equipped with the competencies. So what we have done is that for the purposes of those economic zones, as demanded by the economy, our role is to be able to design what we call upskilling programs. So for the people who have experience and expertise in, for example, dressmaking and tailoring, our work is to ensure that we do a training needs analysis that bridges the gap between what the technology in the industry is demanding in as far as the economic zones are concerned, and the gap that we need to fill in terms of assessing, training, and certifying those beneficiaries.
So where do you train them? Or do other people provide the training and all you do is provide the certification?
Several ways. One that I've listed, that we have our 5 mandated training centers spread across the regions. We have a training center in Mombasa, 2 training centers in Nairobi, 1 in Athi River, and 1 in Kisumu. But as I've said before, we have also accredited over 500 training providers who are specialized in certain trade areas for the purposes of expanding the training atmosphere, for the purposes of that.
What then is your liaison with potential employers thereafter? After this training has been done, a skill set upgraded or even established amongst, different job sectors or categories, what then is your connection with job placement for those who may pass through the system?
Yeah, thank you very much for that critical question. We have several nexus with the employers and the employment environment. One is that for us to be able to satisfy the demands for the economy, we have relying on what we call the labor market information systems that is hosted by the Ministry of Labor. This is a system that provides us with the gaps that the economy demands in terms of skills, the job opportunities that exist, and the areas that are demanded for the purposes of assessment and certification. So our work is to be able to link this labor market information systems with the demands that are brought in by the employers, because the employers are our key beneficiaries and as far as levy management is concerned. So our work is to be able to understand what are demanded by the employers who are our key clients and customers, and what is derived from the labor market information system, so that we can be able to bridge this gap that allows us to satisfy the economy.
So are we saying that directly that NITA trained professionals, because that's essentially what they would be when they pass through the system, are guaranteed of work across the country? Or is it kind of like, let's have a conversation about if you can take our graduates?
I want to agree with you that ours is not a supply-driven types of competence development, but ours is the demand-driven sort of competence development, because we rely on what comes in from the demands of the employers. But more importantly, also we have free citizenry who come in on the context of what they require for the purposes of entering the job market in terms of entrepreneurship, and more importantly, those who are sponsored by other partners that feel that certain skills are required for the purposes of satisfying transition into the world of work.
So when I listen to you, engineer, I hear several things. I hear industry demand. NITA listens to industry demand, comes up with standards, curriculum, training, examination, certification. And you're in the Ministry of Labor, am I right? Then when you talk about skilling and imparting of knowledge, we've got the Ministry of Education and the Kenya National Examinations Council. Ministry trains, Examinations Council examines, certifies. People in other professions, accounting, CASNEB, examines, certifies, comes up with a curriculum. There are so many things that are happening all over. For somebody who, you are an engineer, for example, I'd imagine that the Kenya Engineers Board has you on their roll. I'd imagine that when you went to university and got the degree, that is recognized by the Commission for University Education and no NITA at some point. So where is the convergence between all these various certifying bodies and the market and then what you hold as proper paper?
Yeah, thank you very much. And what you have outlined is very important, because the learning education and training atmosphere in this country is given a lot of prominence by the government. And that is why, in terms of the budget, it takes almost 30% of the budget for the purposes of ensuring that the education system in Kenya is properly facilitated by the government. If that is the case, then the Ministry of Education comes in to formalize the transition of learners from the current now 263 system, which is the current CBC system. But for the purposes of satisfying the demands of the economy in as far as technology of the industry is concerned, we have several pathways which we are informed by the Kenya National Qualifications Framework. The formal pathway is the pathway in which we have systems that recognize that you have to go through primary education, through nursery to primary, through secondary education, you transit to tertiary institutions and university, and you gain certain qualifications that are extremely formal. But then that might not be enough, because in terms of the industry demands, it might require that after gaining your diploma, that diploma is formalized.
Yeah.
One is that you require experiential training in the industry. So one of the functions that NITA does in this economy is that we administrate what we call industrial attachment. It is a requirement that all beneficiaries in training institutions, for the purposes of the courses that they take, that they take what we call industrial attachment. So one of the things that we buffer in terms of experiential learning is that our learners are taken through industrial attachment for the purposes of interfacing what the industry demands and what the formal training institutions demand. But more importantly, again, as you get into the world of work, you discover that the equipment, the machinery, the behavior that is demanded by the world of work would require that you are upskilled or reskilled for the purposes of the dynamics of the economy. And that is where NITA comes in. That we provide a pathway that includes an entry behavior that is more open. That you can have a beneficiary who is skilled in a certain particular trade area, but requires upskilling for the purposes of matching the demands of that particular workspace. And then we take them through apprenticeship, take them through short-term programs, which are informed by national occupation standards, into qualification packs that then can be assessed and certified through the accredited qualifications in the National Qualifications Framework.
Very, very elaborate pathway. The law that establishes you, does it also mandate industries to support NITA? Is there something like a levy that they pay?
You are very right in that context, because when you look at our functions, is that one of our functions is to ensure that we partner very strongly with all employers in Kenya to be able to support our programs through the industrial training levy system, whereby it is required by law under that function that all employers would be able to remit to that industrial levy fund an amount equivalent to 50 shillings per month per employee, which is remitted through our systems that we established in as far as support is concerned.
What does that money do?
That money does several things. One is that it is the fund that is used to be able to reimburse the trainings that is demanded by the employers. So when employers then require that they upskill or capacity build the employees, then they'll be able to request for that support, identify a training partner. That training partner must be accredited by NITA. Then we are able to then process that requirement, and after they have trained or before, then we make sure that we return an investment on that particular levy for those employers who are compliant for the purposes of capacity building their workers.
Is NITA certification mandatory? Like, if anybody in these sectors who then comes for this additional training after having gotten their diploma, and then you're going on to, a further placement, for example, is it mandatory that I present NITA certificate, for example, to be able to get placement?
Thank you very much for that. Yes, for the purposes of standardizing the behavior of workers in this economy, NITA certification is highly recognized, not only nationally, but also globally and regionally. For the purposes that, for example, if you want to be a licensed electrician, it will be required that probably you have an NITA grade 1, and then you are taken through EPRA so that you are licensed as an electrician in this country. And that is how important that certification is for the purposes.
But is it mandatory?
Well, it should be mandatory for the purposes of the demands of particular employers, and that is how important this is.
So an employer, essentially, if you're coming in to work in industry, for example, that requires very many electricians, for example, one of the things that they would look at is, do you have your NITA certification? Is that right?
That's right. That's very right.
Okay.
For the purposes of even wage rates and etc., you require that you have a certification that can quantify your entry behavior into those salary scales and wages.
How old is NITA?
Well, as you see from our logo, we were established in 1925, and we have transited through those ages up to now. So we are actually old as from 1925.
Were you always called NITA? We
have changed our names from that time. I think we were called Industrial Training Ordinances. We came into Directorate of Industrial Training up to 2011. So up to 2011, we actually a directorate in the Ministry of Labor for the purposes of our functions. But then we became a state corporation in 2011, established by Industrial Training Cap 237.
One of the footprints that I actually have come across with motor mechanics. That's where I actually understood that there was this grading system. Now, you say it is internationally recognized, meaning if this nephew of mine who wants to be a motor mechanic and has gone through the grades and gotten the highest grading possible, are you saying that that grade will be recognized across the border in Uganda or in Tanzania?
Excellent and true. For the purposes of the qualifications framework, which is now recognized both nationally and regionally, and almost globally, it is important that even for labor mobility and to access certain labor markets, for example, now Kenya is a supplier of labor. We export labor to other countries, including the Middle East, including domestic workers. It is important and a requirement that the bilateral agreements demand that we have to certify those immigrants of labor for the purposes of their acceptance. And therefore, the NITA qualifications form the basic requirement for certain levels of immigration or migration of workers to other economies.
What's the highest certification that you you give at NITA?
Yes, for a long time we have been offering qualifications from grade 3 as the lowest, followed by grade 2 and grade 1. But now we have introduced certain grades beyond grade 1, what we call master craft person qualifications, which now go up to level 8 of the Kenya National Qualifications Framework.
Can those then be transferred? If someone wants to upskill and to go into a more formal sort of education, they want to get a diploma,
academic.
a degree, yes, academic qualification. Can they use their qualifications, their NITA grade 1 or grade or the new ones that you've introduced, and they get some credits when they're enrolling for degree?
Very, very true. And that is why we have the qualifications framework for horizontal mobility of qualifications. For example, when I say that the highest qualification for NITA now will be professional master craft person, that is equivalent to level 8 of the qualifications framework. That is actually equivalent to a postgraduate degree in Kenya, level 8. So you can imagine that even at, say, level 4, you can easily transfer, credit transfer your qualifications to the other formal qualifications, maybe equivalent to diploma or ETC.
Okay. Let's take a break. We'll continue this conversation shortly after this break. Engineer Stephen Ogenga is the Director General of the National Industrial Training Authority, NITA. We are talking about how NITA is actually helping in upskilling our youth, because today is World Youth Skills Day 2022. Reminding you about election bill and norma. We are going into an election in how many days, Ndu? 24 days. In those 24 days, as we go into an election, we've got to remember that we have neighbors, City.
Yes, we do have neighbors, and those neighbors may have a completely different opinion and a view about what their political role and position is. And when they express it through their support for individuals and eventually through the ballot, we must be accommodating and understanding that even after the election, they'll still be our neighbors. And that the differences that we now see with the election have always been there. They're just now being manifested because you probably support different candidates. Election bill and norma means you can go through all these processes and yet come out of it at the end, remembering that life goes on even after the elections.
Indeed.
Yes.
The Standard Group has partnered with the National Cohesion and Integration Commission to push this campaign and this conversation. Election bill and norma, Penda Jirani. We've got our teams out on the ground this week and into next week. Our teams, I think, are in Eldoret today. They've been in Kericho in the last couple of days, engaging the people, especially looking at the hotspots that the NCIC had mapped and said, these ones are likely to experience some violence. Just engaging the people and preaching the message. Elections, bill and norma, Penda Jirani. We'll be back shortly.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
And we have with us in the studio Engineer Stephen Ogenga. He's the Director General of the National Industrial Training Authority. Today being World Youth Skills Day 2022. A couple of comments coming in on social media. I know you're going to sample them. Engineer, as we get to engage and understand what NITA has been doing, you've said NITA has several centers across the country where you actually conduct direct training, and then you've also accredited other institutions. How many are they? 200, was it? The accredited institutions.
Yes, thank you very much. As I mentioned earlier, we have our own 5 training centers, and we have accredited in our database over 500 training providers.
Yes.
Thank you.
It's over 500 across the country.
Yes, please.
And are these just from village polytechnics to national polytechnics? Are there some universities as well?
That's true. We have accredited vocational training centers for the purposes of assessment and certification of programs, but we have private training providers whom we have accredited for the purposes of certain programs that they offer to the employers for upskilling, reskilling, and even pre-skilling of employees. So it's a cross-cutting accreditation of training providers that have specialist areas of capacity building for their potential workers and beneficiaries.
Okay, a couple of questions coming in. So, I mean, obviously this, Bruce he says, I've been in NITA Mombasa from 2018 as a student and finished my certificate course in 2019 in electrical installation. Till date, we've not received our certificates and the whole course till date, and we cannot apply for jobs without our transcripts, and we're not getting clear responses. How does he deal with that?
Yes, thank you very much for that comment. Normally, we have a service charter that says that once you have sat your assessment, then the transcripts should come within a month or otherwise. And therefore, for that particular gap that has been commented on, we should be able to look at it. But we normally say that within a month or so, we have already provided the results and transcripts for the purposes of enabling the final certification to come, which actually come within 3 to 6 months.
Okay. So in this one, this must be a peculiar case, is what you're saying, because 2018 is quite a while away.
It's 4 years.
Yeah.
Yes, we want to probably ask the beneficiaries to counter-check with the center, because it could be lying in one of the areas that the person was assessed in.
They clearly have gone back to the center.
They've gone back.
Engineer.
We'll be able to look into that and support it.
How does one get in touch, say, for instance, with the headquarters? And how do they actually, is there a hotline? Is there an email address? Is there a way in which they can write and actually forward this matter with the details so that it can be addressed?
Exactly. We have communications lines which are normally open. We have numbers that are available on our website. We have an email address that we are able to receive comments and complaints and respond to them in terms of a grievance handling mechanism. And we have a corporate communications department that handles all communications and inquiries into the authority. So I would want to encourage our beneficiaries to go into our website, which is www.nita.go.ke, and interact with the communication channels that we've opened for our beneficiaries.
Okay. And so another question from Shira, and she says, question, if I operate a bakery, which procedure gets me to get students trained and given apprenticeship in the market? Does NITA still run the UN sponsorship, and who gets it?
Exactly. Thank you very much, Sheila, for that comment. You are aware that we are part and parcel of the Kenya Youth Employment Opportunities Program, which is a government initiative supported by a loan from World Bank, which has a training function that enables beneficiaries to be supported, especially those who are vulnerable. So for the purposes of that particular initiative and entrepreneurial output, I would request that the beneficiary actually engages with the NITA and other agencies for the purposes of attracting beneficiaries who can accrue for that particular output.
All right. So Duncan says, I only knew about NITA when they started deducting some levy on my salary. Where does that come about? You must have had some interaction with NITA before then you start earning something, and NITA then jumps in and takes a piece of the pie. How does that all work?
Yeah, thank you very much. We actually do not deduct directly from the pay slips of employees. We actually deal with employers who are able to demonstrate that they have an employment database, and that the employers then support those employees through a formal remittance of 50 shillings per employee per month for the purposes of supporting their capacity building.
Wait, if I get employed into a certain industry, am I going to get deducted 50 bob?
Well, the law requires clearly that all registered employers in this economy would be able to be recognized by that particular function, and that as we talk today, for the purposes of the ease of doing business in this economy, we have partnered with the Kenya Revenue Authority so that as you remit your taxes and remit your pay to the KRA, then KRA supports us through the Unified Payroll Returns interface to be able to consolidate the deductions through that particular interface.
Engineer,
So
long and short is that Duncan is being deducted 50 bob. So how does Duncan get a benefit from the 50 bob that he's been paying since he got employed by this employer?
Or if the benefit is in the future, what is it? So that he can comfortably accept being deducted, knowing that this benefit is coming to him and he can expect it.
Yes.
The benefit is actually now and not in the future, because as much as the employers are compliant in as far as remittances of levy is concerned, it is the purpose of the employer to ensure that any skills gaps or competence gaps that the employer feels needs to be required, then they should be able to alert NITA that we have so many employees who have a training gap that we need to be able to support. Then NITA will approve that particular training and reimburse on that particular training given the compliance of the employer who has actually remitted the training levy.
I see. So what you're saying is that if there is a gap in competency, this 50 shillings that this gentleman is having deducted from his pay is what contributes to what NITA, the input NITA will bring into the organization to fill that gap.
Very true. That we work very closely with all employers in Kenya. And that is why in our configuration and oversight, we have the Federation of Kenya Employers, who then assist us in formulating and also supporting the fact that we need to sensitize, and we have always sensitized employers that let us benefit from this pool fund that they remit every month at the rate of 50 shillings per employee. So that now we require that employers then determine through a training needs analysis the skills gap that are demanded by the technology in that particular employment environment. And then we support them through accredited training providers, notwithstanding our own centers, to be able to access employment based on that compliance that they have remitted through the industrial training levy.
So it's upon then the employer to assess their own skills gap and then seek a trainer, an accredited trainer, and take their employees through this. If an employer does not feel there is any skills gap here, and Duncan has been working for this employer for 5 years, and Duncan feels that he'd like to upgrade his own skills, can Duncan directly apply and benefit from this pool?
Exactly, but we would want to formalize this because Duncan is an employee of that particular employer.
Yeah.
Would prefer that Duncan formally goes through the employer, the human resource component, or the human resource manager, so that human resource manager then informs NITA that we have an employee here who is Duncan who requires this particular skills upgrading, and that we can be able to support Duncan in that particular format.
Okay. And then, of course, you're not covering the full fee for the cost, for the training. It's only a subsidy that you're offering, isn't it?
We sometimes cover, we have a criteria that is open on our website that enables the way in which we support those training programs. We have a criteria for supporting them. Right now, we have a motivation approved by the board that we can reimburse up to 200% of the requirements of those particular training, so that we can be able to motivate employers to access this facility.
Okay. And these standards that NITA then has to meet, are they global in nature? So that, say, peradventure, somebody who has gone through this NITA certification then goes to another country whereby, you know, a lot of these jobs categories are professionalized. Would then they be able to sail through on the certification that NITA grants in Kenya?
Very, very important. As part of the global network, and that is why we have established through the Kenya National Qualifications Authority a qualifications framework that allows for credit transfers and recognition of all qualifications in Kenya, notwithstanding the qualifications that are certified by NITA. And therefore, as you said rightly, that with that kind of benchmark and a global qualifications framework, then it is possible for the purposes of labor mobility that our qualifications are recognized not only regionally, but also globally for the purposes of export of labor.
Engineer, how good is our data, our national data on skills and skills gaps?
I presume good, because one, at the Ministry of Labor, we have a database, and also at NITA ourselves, we have our own database of all the beneficiaries that have transited through our qualifications. We have also a database at the National Employment Authority under the Ministry of Labor. We have also a very big database, of course, under the Ministry of Education. We have a database at NEC. We have a database at Kenya National Bureau of Statistics. So all this then can be consolidated to inform the kind of requirements for skills mobility within and without.
Okay,
so I presume that we are pretty good in terms of those kind of databases.
The way you've put it, we have various databases that show us how many people are qualified in whatever skill. But do we have any database that shows us the skills gaps? You say you work very well with the Employers, Federation of Kenya Employers, with the COTU, Central Organization of Trade Unions, and others. Those are from the market end. Do you come together and actually produce a report that shows in this particular year, we don't have people who are at a certain grade in terms of, say, what the city was talking about earlier, plumbing, in electrical, in any other skill? Do you have that shows us at this level we have X number of people which is able to meet the market need? at this level, the market requirement, the market demand is this, and we're only able to meet 70% of it based on those people who have qualified and are certified with this level. Do you have that?
Yes, the Ministry of Labour has the Kenya Labour Market Information Systems that quantifies, profiles, and aggregates exactly what we're saying. What skills are demanded in particular sectors, what kind of skills that we have to satisfy those demands, and therefore within that particular labour market information systems, we're able to determine the demands that are accredited to particular, sectors of the economy, and that is therefore true. Recently, the Ministry of Labour has just carried out a skills and occupation survey to enhance the capacity to determine the nexus between the skills required by the economy and the skills that have already been provided for those particular job demands.
From that database, what's the most glaring skill shortage?
Well, when you look at the skills pyramid, of course, at the database of the skills pyramid are the lowest qualifications, that the artisans. And when you look at a particular industries, you'll discover that, for example, in the building subsector, there's a more demand for plumbers in this economy than the number of plumbers that we can produce. So our work as NITA and other agencies is to ensure that we sensitize the youth and the population to go towards meeting, for example, the demand of plumbers in Kenya, not only in Kenya, but even regionally. So one of the highest gaps that we have in terms of that particular subsector is the demand for plumbers in this country.
I've been told that, I'm not sure it is true, but I've been told that among the gaps we have are gaps for specialized welders. Now, I don't even know.
What is specialized?
I don't know about welding. I thought welding was just welding. So, Why I give that as an example is because if we were to look at the technical skill sets that are available in this country, and we look at the demand that we have for the growth and development that is envisioned for this country, my question is, what is NITA doing to ensure that the needs are actually met?
Very, very, very true. I totally want to agree with you that we actually have a shortage of specialized welders in this country.
What are specialized welders, first of all?
Specialized welders are those welders that are required, for example, in the pipeline industry for high-pressure welding, underwater welding, and other types of welding that require highly specialized welding.
Underwater welding?
Underwater welding for the purposes of underwater activities. We have
a
TIG
pipe
and
running underwater and it has burst.
So you weld it underwater?
You go underwater.
Yes, for the purposes of the blue economy, which is highly supported by this government, we have requirements for underwater welding for our maritime systems and also for highly pressurized welding pipelines, including the Kenya pipelines. Those require expertise that the country is trying to meet at this point in time. And as you have rightfully said, we have a gap in that particular demand for specialized welding in this country.
Do we have institutions that are offering this?
Yes, we have the
Are they well equipped to offer this?
Yes, having noticed that gap, and you're very right, in this economy, then we, as NITA, have partnered with other specialized providers and consultancies to be able to provide a training system looking at the national occupation standards for specialized welding, and partnering with other agencies, including the Morendat, including the Geothermal Development Corporation, Kenya Pipeline, so that we are able to provide and customize specialized training programs that are actually benchmarked with the global standards as borrowed from other economies who have stabilized specialized welding programs.
I want to come back to this issue of communication with those who've gone through the certification, because they've gone through the process, they've done the work, but that they don't seem to be able to get their transcripts or the results back. And in terms of communication with those who've gone through the system, unfortunately, then it paints a blot then on what you're actually able to do for participants. How can they handle this issue of not being able to get? Because here's yet another one. I did my grade 3 test and 2 in NITA Mombasa. Plus, I've been a student too in RIC since 2018. We've emailed NITA headquarters. We've been in the institutions, time without number, all in vain, and I feel wasted. What should folks do? categorically about this issue?
Yes, that is unfortunate that some beneficiaries have not received certain certifications, and I would like to encourage them to urgently get in touch with our center manager, NITA Mombasa, for that particular request. But more importantly, also and we are in touch with that, so that if there were gaps in terms of certain probably information that was missing in as far as that certification is concerned, then that is profiled and appropriately addressed for the purposes of their transition.
You know, there's a company at the coast. It's called Southern Engineering. Among the things that it does, it has a shipyard dock. Now, I am informed that they even have the capacity to manufacture and create and build ferries. Now, I look at those seafaring vessels. There are a lot of welding involved. Now, what I'm asking is, when we grow sectors of that nature, or when they are grown, do we grow them with expertise that we have to import, or are we also ensuring that homegrown expertise is actually meeting the demands for such things?
Thank you very much, and you are very right that over with the time, technology demands in particular industries, especially the marine subsector, requires that we now continually grow our competencies in that particular field. And I want to say that NITA participated in a program that has led to the skills that are required for the shipbuilding, partnering with the government agency. And therefore, this particular employer, the Southern Engineering Dock Workers, or DOC, would be able to find that, for example, our center in Mombasa, we have equipment and capacity to be able to upskill those operators or beneficiaries who will be able to move into shipbuilding, especially for the kind of skills that are required for that particular sector. So we are in the space of ensuring that, as demanded by the maritime industry, then we are able to profile those who already have the expertise and those who require upskilling for the purposes of ensuring that they meet the technology that is required by the maritime industry. So we are right that we are building a lot of capacity with certain employers who are in the blue economy sector to ensure that we satisfy the demands as we progressively grow.
Can we get to a place whereby then because we'll oftentimes look length and breadth of this country, whether it is infrastructure development, whether it is the need of an extra pair of hands in the health sector, education sector, when during the times of COVID, there was the need for carpenters and there was a need, we're looking at classrooms being built and there's a need for professionalism. Are we getting to the point whereby all of these can be drawn from Kenya? Roadworks, master engineers, solutions. Can it get to a point whereby they're all drawn from here in Kenya, as opposed to having to look outside for expertise with the participation of NITA, for example?
Very true and very important, that comment, because when, like I said before, the skills pyramid requires, for example, in the ratio of 1:4:7:15, and at the base of that pyramid is the critical essential workers are required to support those particular industries. And therefore, as NITA is to ensure that at the base of that skills pyramid, we are able to satisfy the demands for the artisans that are required for those particular sectors. And therefore, as we progressively look at the demands of this economy, then we as NITA will look at what are demanded by the building sector. And we work closely with the National Construction Authority to ensure that that the demands that are required for the particular demands for the building subsector are met. That is progressively done for all other industries, including the agricultural sector and all other sectors that we actually are ready to be able to support.
Coming to the end of the conversation, Engineer, tell us about the prior learning recognition. Are you involved in this? And what does it mean for people who have skill but don't have certification?
Very right. Of late, and you've supported us as media in terms of ensuring that the recognition of prior learning pathway is properly sensitized in as far as the demands are concerned. You remember that His Excellency the President demanded or announced that by June of Madaraka of 2021, that policy framework would have to be launched so that it supports the recognition of current competences, of recognition of prior learning that has been accumulated through the beneficiaries who have experiences, expertise that has not been quantified for the purposes of qualifications. So the recognition of prior learning approach is an approach in which we profile the expertise that has accumulated in or through the workers through a particular period. For example, somebody has been a mechanic for 5 years, did not have a formal qualification for the purposes of the expertise that they hold, is taken through a portfolio profiling situation, so that we can quantify that expertise to be able to be certified to enter into a particular qualification. So, for example, then the recognition of prior learning allows that particular profiling and quantification of capacity to be mapped onto the qualifications framework. So sometimes then once we profile you, you can be able to enter into, say, NITA grade 1 for the purposes of the expertise that has been quantified. And we can progress that up to, like I said, a professional masterclass persons at level 8.
So anybody who has, some skill, you've been working as a mechanic, you've been working as a plumber, you've been doing all these things, you just don't have the certification. You can go to NITA and actually they will recognize all your years and all your expertise and experience, and then you start getting certification. It's a good thing.
Exactly. We have had a successful pilot program of the same, and we believe that once that opens up, then a number of citizens who have expertise over periods of time will be profiled and quantified and be certified for the purposes of labor mobility.
Asante sana. Engineer Stephen Ogenga, Director General of the National Industrial Training Authority, has been here with us. We've been talking about what NITA does today as we commemorate World Youth Skills Day 2022. The future is not bleak. The future is bright. There's a lot that's being done. It's just that there's not much awareness. And now that's why we're here, to create that awareness.